we have this book that I found. And all the research I did, there's a lot of books written about the prophecy of the popes that the general public is not aware of. Now, the thing is, most of these are by Catholic scholars, and most of them are European, so they're not in English, okay? There's a lot of books in Italian. There's books in French. And this one that I found, The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes, by René Thébault, it's all written in French. He's a Belgian Jesuit, and he worked at a university, and he really believed the prophecy of the popes. Okay, he believed it deeply, but he believed the original underlying level of context. So what we think we have an ancient prophecy. Maybe it was written by Malachi, maybe it wasn't. Nobody can really know for sure about that because we just don't have any evidence going all the way back to Malachi other than kind of the legendary story. But what we do have is we have this document. Now, we can detect that there were alterations made prior to 1570. The way we can detect that is that there was a famous book by Panvinius, who was a scholar who wrote a papal history about all the popes. Now, he made some errors. He made some mistakes in his book. Now, this was like the source material for the papacy during that time, during the 16th century. Now, what we see in the Malachi prophecy is that in the prophecies up to 1590, somebody went and wrote an interpretation next to the Latin phrase. Now, they wrote who the Pope was, how it was fulfilled, and what the fulfillment was. Now, what they did, it's a dead giveaway, is that they made some of the same mistakes as Panvinius's book. Now, this kind of shows us that somebody manipulated the prophecy to make it fit that book. Now, why would they do that? They were trying to make it really obvious so that any cardinal that tried to investigate the prophecy for himself would be able to look at this source material and then look at the reference book that he would have available, which would be Panvinius's book, and he would find an exact match. So it looks like someone manipulated the text prior to 1570 to do that as an effort for propaganda, and that we think that they were trying to get a certain pope elected. Okay, but after that date, then there's no reason that anyone would ever alter it because it was way into the future. So we can really believe that we have this underlying authentic text that goes from that date forward. So René Thébault really presents a lot of good arguments for why 1570 is the cutoff point. Now, if you go to Wikipedia or read John Hogue or any of the more modern people, they're going to say that it was 1595 because that's when we had the first copy in hand that was published by Arnold D. Wyan. But so 1570 is where we start the original text, and that's the date that I'm going with because the arguments for that are pretty strong. Now, what Thébault did is he figured out average papal reign up to his time in 1951 when he published this book, and it was 11 years. And what he did, all you have to do to prove that to yourself is you just take how many days the Pope was in office and divide it by the number of popes, and you get the average papal reign. Now, from 1570 to the last Pope, the 112th, you have a certain number, and so you have a calculation, and if you put 11 years for each one, where do you land? Well, René Thébault calculated it in 1951 and landed on 2012. Okay, and all the things that Tom said about 2012. You have all these weird prophecies. You have the Mayans. All the New Agers are talking about 2012. I've been skeptical about 2012 myself in the past because it just seems like all these pagans and New Agers and all this kind of stuff. I didn't really want to buy into it. But there's some reason why all these people are coming on the same thing. And then we get into this research, and it's the last thing I expected. I find
that Chris, while we're waiting on Steve to get back on the line.
I believe we have Steve, you back with it? Okay.
Yep, I'm back.
Yes.
Well, while we were waiting on Steve, and thank God you're back, Steve. Man, the ship needs, a captain. But we were talking about this book by René Thébault. He's a Belgian priest. His book is a meticulous analysis of the prophecy of the popes. In our book, we provide as much of his background as can be known, the fact that he was Belgian-born, when he was born, the fact that he was a Jesuit in the order in something like 1901. Later on, he was an instructor at the faculty of the University de Namur, which is founded by the Jesuit order in 1831, and so on. But this was a guy. He was an academic. He published books on theology, biblical studies in French, and several. The Meaning of Christ's Words was one he published. The Meaning of the God-Man was one. But what we look at is a book that he published. It was a codex. He was a code breaker, and he published this work just before he died. The book was published in 1951, and he died at 69 in Egenhoven, Belgium in 1952. So he died right after it was published. But what he did, and what Cris found, was that this Jesuit adopted the methodology of a Catholic mystic, as well as being a scholar and a mathematician and a code breaker. And his book makes this compelling case that the prophecy of the popes is a real prophecy, regardless from what source it was inspired, demonically or divinely. And he approaches his study from this real complex, what Cris said, mathematical, cryptographical, anagrammatical, even solar activity, to show from numerous improvable possibilities that something very strange, call it supernatural if you like, something very strange was involved in the prophecy of the popes. And it either is supernaturally inspired, or people inside the Vatican believe it was, and therefore have been electing popes for hundreds of years that they feel would fulfill this prophecy of the popes. And what might that indicate, therefore, for the upcoming conclave that's going to happen at any moment, according to news sources, to elect the successor to Pope Pope Benedict XVI, which on the list is Petrus Romanus, who gives rise to the Antichrist and end times prophecy. So if insiders at the Vatican believe it, if they've been selecting popes that they think can fulfill that prophecy, then what are they committed to? And if that's not the case, then the prophecy itself is very mysterious in that it has been very accurate. And what I want to tell people is I'm not just an author, and I'm also a best-selling author, but I'm a publisher. And I got to tell you, the miniature masterpiece in our new book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, that was written by Cris Putnam, that chapter that deals exclusively with the work by René Thibault, it's fresh, it's investigative, it's scholarly, it's well-researched, it's never been published anywhere before, and I guarantee you it's going to stun some readers, the media. It's a game-changer for mythologists and other prophecy writers who are going to be taken, really, offside by it. The 2012
Tom,
community is old news compared to what Cris has discovered. Yes?
I think we need to bring in David Flynn's work, Temple at the Center of Time, too, because one of the things that is really prevalent, especially in the rocks falling out of the sky or whatever, missiles, call it what you will, is obviously Dave Flynn was given the Newton interpretation of the code that Sir Isaac Newton knew existed but was not given the time to do it. And I thought it was interesting. I talked to Mark, David's twin brother, the other day, and I said, it's interesting to me, Mark, that David was taken home to be with Jesus. He went to heaven, he died, but to me, he's as alive now as he was the last time I sat with him in his apartment or in my office, and we shared the most amazing stuff. But here's what I want to say. It is conceivable, you guys, that obviously, you've heard it, I've heard it, that the Catholic Church behind the scenes is wrangling for control of Jerusalem, okay? You know that, Tom. You've even alluded to that in some of your writings. And, Cris, I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, Cris has written his second
it.
masterpiece in our new book is on that subject.
Okay, so I think we need to go there, you guys. Here's the thing, and I don't mean – we've got people that are trying to get to the bottom line. And, you know, Tom, my nickname is Bottom Line, okay? And while you're a researcher, I'm a researcher, Chris is a scholar, the point is let's bring it now up to the next step, because even one of the guys that was listening to us tonight, he said, isn't it interesting that the temple, or that's the place of where everything was, directed at Jesus to fall down. First of all, the temple in Jerusalem was God's presence. But the other thing is, it proves a better point, ladies and gentlemen, people still look to a building instead of the Savior. That's my 2 cents worth. So, Chris, would you deal with that about how this thing could work out and play? Because I think we need to bring this right into the reign of Antichrist. The false prophet gives us power into the beast, all that stuff that's going on. And basically, we're talking about Lucifer's end-time play for control of the world. So, and Tom, I don't mean to take away from Petrus Romanus, but I think it's really critical that we deal with that because, again, all of the excitement and the turning every single leaf over doesn't help the people that are still trying to follow us and really probably don't care about some of the most exciting things. They just want to know the bottom line. So what I'm trying to do is give you guys 8 hours worth of the radio time to get just to the bottom line, okay?
Well, Steve, before I moved to Jerusalem, we were talking about. Am I still on? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
The sound went out. Okay. I want to go ahead and publish this thing to my site so people can go and verify this thing with the 11-year reign. I'm going to go ahead and hit publish right now at Logos Apologia. Okay, that should be live on the internet in just a minute. Now, what this will show you is that the calculation with 11 years per pope extrapolated up to now works out perfectly, and in fact, it supports that it could happen in the next 2 or 3 months. Now, we can talk about it more later if you guys want to look at it, but what you're saying.
I want to leave that, if you don't mind, Chris. Not because it's not cool and not because it's so amazing, but we've got to bring everybody up to, Petrus Romanus will be out in 6 weeks, and everybody can, or so. That's what I think you said, Tom. But the point is, everyone can read what you're posting daily or every other day on Raiders or on. And by the way, Tom, just so you know, I'm linking to those as you write them. But the point is that I think it's critical because, look, we've got the Middle East war brewing. We've got the situation with all the Catholic intrigue. And then how do you both figure? Here's a question that I want to hear from both of you. Tom, you and I did a show on the alien disclosure, okay? And I'm not trying to take away and get into UFO or take away from Petrus Romanus, but it's got to be obvious to everybody that a man in the position who's going to assume the final pope, the Black Pope's role, is more than a adept at all this stuff.
Well, that's absolutely right, and I want Chris to talk about the here's the thing, Steve. The work by René Thibault is directly connected to what David Flynn wrote about. It's directly connected to what's happening in the Middle East. The bottom line is all of this prophecy is bits and pieces, parts to a puzzle that provide a much bigger picture that says to the Christian community, you better wake up because you are right now entering into a period of time that has been prophesied for thousands of years to unfold. This is part of the reason why both Chris and I, at times during the work on this research, stopped dead in our tracks and almost didn't publish this work because, frankly, it was that unnerving. And I'd love to talk in a moment about David Flynn's work and plans that you and I have, but I don't want to take away from Chris answering the question about what this has to do with the Vatican's designs on Jerusalem and the next temple.
Right, and Chris, if you would too, answer that question and then answer your take, and if you don't have one you want to defer to, and I mean, I don't know because none of this is rehearsed, ladies and gentlemen, defer to Tom on it. I think the two critical points are the Vatican's move to Jerusalem and the alien connection, because obviously I believe that the presence of fallen angels, and I can share true stories about that from eyewitnesses at these ceremonies under the catacombs in the Vatican and under, if you will, the Holy City, It's far from being holy. The point that I'm trying to make is that we've got to bring people up to speed, and then Tom will go to the temple at the center of time, because that's critical too. So please, Chris, go ahead with the first, if you would.
Well, certainly. Steve, it's interesting that you went there, because that when after kind of establishing that I believe there was something to the prophecy, the first place that I went was to the Jerusalem issue, and one of the first documents that I found, that's something that is going to be revealed probably for the first time for a lot of people in this book, is that the site Al Jazeera found a whole bunch of classified U.S. State Department documents that from WikiLeaks and other places, and they put them up on the internet. And I went and dug through a whole cache of documents there. And I have a conversation that happened in the U.S. State Department between Condoleezza Rice and some representatives from the Palestinians, where they're actually talking about turning over the holy city of Jerusalem to quote unquote religious authorities, non-government people. Okay. Now, where that coincides with a lot of research coming out of Israel is like people like Barry Kamish, and I went and bought like 3 of his books. He's been on this story for the last 15 years or so, where Simon Peres, who's now the president of Israel, promised the old holy city of Jerusalem to the Vatican. This has been going on for quite a while. This conspiracy has been going on that they think that there's going to be some kind of peace deal between the Palestinians and Israel, and they're going to make Jerusalem an international city that's not really the capital of Israel anymore. It's going to be international. It's going to have a Palestinian representative, and it's going to have a Jewish representative. But they're actually talking about putting the Pope in charge of Jerusalem. And right as we were finishing up the research for the book, there's been a whole slew of articles coming out of Jerusalem where they're giving up the sovereignty of some of the holy sites to the Vatican right now. Just in the last couple weeks, there's a monastery that has supposedly David's grave, and also the Hall of the Last Supper is there. Now, the last articles that I read, it seems to be that they have actually given sovereignty over that landmark to the Vatican already. So it's not if it's going to happen; it's already happening now, as far as I know. And where this is going, I think it's leading to the Third Temple.
Yep.
I really do. And when you start looking at the prophecies in 2 Thessalonians about the Antichrist sitting in the temple declaring himself God, I think that is speaking to a real temple in Jerusalem, and not an allegorical temple. And I think that we're seeing the pieces of that falling into place right now. Don't you think so, Tom?
Well, I think it's almost impossible to, even in a 4-hour interview, to be able to detail for all of the listeners all of the ways in which we are right now seeing a waterfall of biblical fulfillment. I don't want to be crude, but a person would have to be an idiot not to understand that we have entered into a very portentous moment in time. It's stuff that David Flynn wrote about. And Steve, because you know how I am, I start talking, and then I can't shut up. Why don't we let people know what you and I are planning to do with David Flynn's research?
Why don't you go ahead, Tom, because obviously you will be the publisher of it, and go ahead. Because I think it's important that people understand that he laid the foundation that other men will build on. Again, I'm so sad that the Lord took him, but I almost feel like it was a time thing too. I think that David would have probably, and I believe this is true, he was on to so much that for the time it wasn't given for us to know at that specific point. I'm talking in the last several weeks since his passing. And so go ahead and share what we're going to do, because I think it's critical that people understand this.
Well, and also, Steve, you said a moment ago that the two top things you want to discuss is the Vatican's design on Jerusalem, which Chris has spent a great deal of time researching in a very scholarly way for this upcoming book. And you said, secondly, the connection between the Vatican and alienology, for want of a better word. But there is a third, and in my opinion, this is probably the most prescient. This is probably the most important issue, having to do with Petrus Romanus and who is going to be elected as the Pope to succeed Pope Benedict XVI. And that has to do with a cover-up of the Fatima visions, what Malachi Martin was trying to make the world aware of, what I think we could make the world aware of, and it's very much why we're doing this radio show. And so I'm hoping, I realize we got a couple more hours, but that last hour is for people to send in questions. So I hope we get a moment to go back and visit that issue, because it will explain a lot for people what is going on in Rome right now and why they're seeing this current backstabbing event where these various power brokers are turning on each other inside the Vatican. And it's very much germane to this discussion. Now, having said that, though, and I was hoping we would get time tonight to say something about David Flynn. Flynn was a very dear friend to me. He was a very dear friend to you. David Flynn is probably one of the most plagiarized guys in history.
Absolutely.
His website was ahead of everybody. The Watcher's website, the stuff he was writing out there, there's got to be several dozen books by even best-selling authors out there right now who ripped off his material and never gave him credit. It sounds like the world of Christian expression through written literature to me, Tom. Yeah.
I mean, it always happens, and so we're setting the record straight, so continue. I'm sorry. Yeah. I just feel strong
and by the way, you mentioned the book that I published, Temple at the Center of Time.